A fruit that blooms for a single night, dies before sunrise, and somehow built a billion-dollar industry. You've seen it in smoothie bowls. You've scrolled past it on Instagram, but you don't know where it actually came from. And the answer, when you trace it back, involves Aztec ceremonies, French priests, Vietnamese farmers tricking plants with light bulbs, and one Indian state so offended by its name they tried to erase it. Dragon fruit conquered the world by becoming something it wasn't. Over and over again. An Asian fruit from the Americas. A dragon relic invented by marketers. A summer crop forced to grow in winter. A mild-tasting cactus rebranded as a luxury superfood. This is the story of the greatest trick in food history. Dragon fruit is associated with Asia today. Smoothie bars in Bangkok. Night markets in Ho Chi Minh City. Grocery aisles in Shanghai. But it didn't originate anywhere near Asia. The plant is a cactus, native to the jungles of Central America, southern Mexico, Guatemala, Costa Rica, El Salvador. But not the kind of cactus you picture in a desert. This one climbs. It wraps itself around trees and rocks like a vine, sending out long, fleshy green arms in every direction. And it has one trait that separates it from nearly every fruit you've ever eaten. It only blooms at night. One night. That's all it gets. The flower is enormous. Up to 14 inches long and 9 inches wide. Pure white petals with a golden center. It opens after sunset, fills the air with a sweet fragrance, and by morning, it's dead. That earned it names like Queen of the Night and Moonflower. Why one night is enough, that answer involves a strategy so clever it took scientists centuries to understand. We'll get there. But first, the people who found this fruit before anyone else. The Aztecs and Mayans knew it well. It appears in Aztec writings and drawings as early as the 13th century. Historians believe people cultivated it for centuries before that. They ate it raw. They offered it in sacred ceremonies. Some researchers believe it held spiritual significance. A fruit born from darkness, delivered by creatures of the night. The Aztecs called it pitahaya. That name stuck for hundreds of years, and the fruit might have stayed a regional curiosity forever. Except two groups of Europeans showed up, and without meaning to, they set off a chain of events that would eventually make this cactus worth more than gold. The first trick dragon fruit ever pulled was geographic. It convinced the world it was Asian. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Central America in the 1500s, they documented everything. Plants, animals, people, gold. They recorded vine cacti growing wild across Mexico and Guatemala. They carried cuttings back to Europe, and, more importantly, they carried them across the Pacific to the Philippines. The fruit's first jump across an ocean. But the real turning point came 300 years later. Around 1860, French missionaries carried the plant to Indochina. That's modern-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. They weren't thinking about agriculture. They were planting ornamental gardens. They thought the cactus looked interesting. The climate was perfect. Southern Vietnam has sandy soil, intense sunshine, and just enough rain. The cactus didn't just survive, it took over. For decades, the Vietnamese treated it as decoration, something pretty to grow behind a house. Nobody was building an industry around it. But when the Vietnamese adopted this fruit, they did something neither the Spanish nor the French had done. They gave it a new identity. Thang Long. It means green dragon. Why? Look at the fruit. The bright pink or red skin has overlapping green-tipped scales. They look like the body of a dragon from East Asian mythology, not the fire-breathing monsters of European legend. The Vietnamese dragon is a sacred, benevolent creature, a symbol of rain, prosperity, and imperial power. Vietnamese people trace their ancestry to a dragon king. The dragon is woven into the nation's founding myth. So the Vietnamese didn't just rename a fruit, they gave it a mythology. And that mythology would prove more valuable than the fruit itself. Legend makers ran with it. Asian marketers eventually created a story. The fruit was the last thing to come from a fire-breathing dragon's mouth. When a warrior slew the dragon, the fruit tumbled out with its final breath. The soldier would collect it and present it to the emperor as proof of victory. None of that is historically real. But it's brilliant marketing. And it stuck. By the time the fruit reached Western consumers, pitahaya had been replaced. Everyone called it dragon fruit. The exotic name made it unforgettable. That invented Asian identity would become so powerful that, centuries later, a government would try to erase it for political reasons. But that's still ahead. For most of the 20th century, almost nobody outside Southeast Asia cared about dragon fruit. It was cheap, it was local, it was invisible. Then three forces transformed it: Vietnamese farming innovation, Chinese competition, and Western image culture. The first force was Vietnamese ingenuity. For decades, dragon fruit had been a backyard curiosity in southern Vietnam. A few hectares here and there, nothing industrial. But farmers in Binh Thuan province, a coastal region northeast of Ho Chi Minh City, noticed something that changed everything. Dragon fruit grows fast. You plant it, and within 12 to 14 months, it flowers and fruits. Most fruit trees take years before they produce anything. Dragon fruit gives you a return in your first year. Full production hits within 3 to 4 years. And the plant can keep producing for 20 to 30 years. In a country rebuilding after decades of war where families needed income now, not in 5 years, that wasn't just convenient. It was survival. Picture a farmer named Tran. His family had waited years for other crops to mature. When his neighbor planted dragon fruit and sold the first harvest within a year, Tran converted his land the following season. Then his brother did the same. Then the village across the road. Binh Thuan went all in. From just a few hectares, the province grew to over 30,000 hectares of dragon fruit, nearly 70% of Vietnam's total production. The entire country eventually reached 55,000 hectares, producing over 1 million tons every year. But here's what made Vietnam different from every other country growing this fruit: the light bulbs. This was the second trick. Dragon fruit tricked the seasons. The plant naturally fruits once a year. In summer, it's what scientists call a long day plant. It needs extended daylight to trigger flowering. In winter, when days are short, the cactus goes dormant. No flowers, no fruit, no income. Vietnamese farmers figured out that if you hang light bulbs above the cactus and leave them on at night, you can fool the plant into thinking it's still summer. The artificial light extends the day. The cactus flowers. It fruits, year-round. If you fly into Ho Chi Minh City after dark, you'll see it. Enormous fields glowing below. Not cities, not highways, farms. Dragon fruit farms lit up like stadiums, stretching for miles. Those lights are so bright that satellites can detect them from space. Researchers at Chapman University used nighttime satellite imagery to track Vietnam's dragon fruit expansion. Because the seasonal glow pattern is that distinctive. You can literally watch the industry grow from orbit. Imagine being one of those farmers. You string electrical wires above your crop. You hang bulbs at regular intervals. Every evening, you switch them on and hope the electricity bill is worth it. If the harvest comes, your family eats well for months. If it doesn't, you've spent money you couldn't afford on a light show for a cactus. For most, the gamble paid off. By 1995, Vietnam made history. It became the first country to export dragon fruit to the international market. And within 2 decades, dragon fruit became the country's second most valuable fruit export, ahead of everything except durian. At its peak in 2018, Vietnamese dragon fruit exports hit $1.3 billion in a single year. $1.3 billion from a cactus. Farmers started calling it white gold. Rural families moved from poverty into stability. Women made up a significant portion of the workforce, especially in the Mekong Delta. Entire communities were built on dragon fruit money. But 80% of those exports went to one customer, China, and Vietnam had just taught its biggest customer every secret of the crop. For years, China was the perfect buyer. Massive population, growing middle class, insatiable appetite for fresh tropical fruit. Vietnamese trucks carried hundreds of containers across the border daily. Then China decided it didn't want to buy anymore. It wanted to grow. Starting in the early 2010s, China began planting dragon fruit on an enormous scale. In 2011, the country had roughly 3,300 hectares. By 2022, that number had exploded to 67,000 hectares, a staggering increase of more than 1,100%. Production hit 1.6 million tons per year, more than Vietnam in both area and output. The government backed it with subsidies, technical support, and new high-yielding varieties. Guangxi province led the charge, eventually accounting for 40% of the country's production. Greenhouses in Hainan produced year-round. Smart LED systems cut energy costs. Farmers in Zhejiang province worked through the night hand-pollinating flowers to maximize every harvest. And then the border started going quiet. Picture a Vietnamese truck driver arriving at the Chinese crossing in 2023. He's carrying 20 tons of ripe dragon fruit. The fruit has maybe 72 hours before it starts softening. Before the pandemic, hundreds of trucks crossed daily. Now there are fewer buyers on the other side. Chinese-grown fruit is already on the shelves, and it costs less. He waits. The price drops. The fruit begins to lose value by the hour. In the first half of 2023, Chinese imports of Vietnamese dragon fruit fell 50% year over year, the lowest in nearly a decade. Domestic dragon fruit in Chinese markets sold for around 7 yuan per kilogram. Vietnamese imports cost 9. Why buy from your neighbor when you grow it cheaper yourself? By late 2025, Vietnam's dragon fruit exports had fallen to $485 million over 11 months, down from that $1.3 billion peak just 7 years earlier. The families who had built their lives around the crop were watching their income shrink. A farmer who'd moved out of poverty on dragon fruit money was now wondering if the crop that saved his family might eventually fail it. But Vietnam wasn't the only country scrambling. China had copied Vietnam's success. And soon, countries on every warm continent were attempting the same thing. Once Vietnam proved that dragon fruit could be industrialized, the race was on. Here's something that would have been unthinkable 30 years ago. Dragon fruit is now grown in more than 30 countries on 6 continents: Indonesia, Thailand, Colombia, Mexico, India, Israel, Nicaragua, Australia, all growing commercially. And as the fruit spread, one discovery changed the economics entirely. Changing its color could change its price. The most common variety, the one you probably picture, has pink skin and white flesh with tiny black seeds. It's mild, subtly sweet, and the cheapest to produce. This is the workhorse of the dragon fruit world. Mass market. Available everywhere. Then there's the red-fleshed version. Same pink exterior, but slice it open and you find deep magenta flesh, almost electric in color. It's sweeter, richer, and commands a premium. This is the version that photographs well, the version that sells drinks, the version Instagram made famous. And then there's the rarest commercial variety. Yellow dragon fruit, bright yellow skin, small thorns instead of scales, white flesh inside. It's the sweetest of all three and the most expensive. Almost all of it comes from Colombia, which produces over 76% of the world's yellow pitahaya. So here's the trick the market pulled. The same underlying cactus, same family, same basic biology, was split into 3 completely different products at 3 completely different price points. A farmer in Vietnam growing white-fleshed fruit competes in a different universe than a farmer in Colombia growing yellow. Some cultivars even have names that sound like rock bands. David Bowie, Bloody Mary, American Beauty, LA Woman. The global cultivation area now sits at roughly 140,000 to 145,000 hectares worldwide. The market is growing at 5 to 7% annually, and it shows no sign of slowing. Would you have guessed that? A cactus fruit that was basically unknown outside Asia 30 years ago, now a global commodity grown across 6 continents. But the biggest surprise in the dragon fruit story isn't about money or agriculture, it's about identity. And the question of who gets to own a fruit's name. Remember how the Vietnamese gave this fruit a dragon identity? How marketers invented a myth about warriors and emperors? That story worked too well. January 2021, Gujarat, India. Chief Minister Vijay Rupani holds a press conference. He announces that the state government has decided to rename dragon fruit. The new name, Kamalam. That's a Sanskrit word meaning lotus. His reasoning? The word dragon sounded too Chinese. India and China were locked in a military standoff along the Himalayan border. 20 Indian soldiers had died in clashes the previous June. New Delhi had banned Chinese apps, restricted imports. The tension was real and raw, so renaming a fruit felt like a move. But here's where it gets layered. The lotus also happens to be the official symbol of Prime Minister Modi's ruling party, the BJP, and the BJP's state headquarters in Gujarat. It's called Sri Kamalam. The internet noticed. Social media erupted. Memes flooded Twitter. One writer called it India's genuinely innovative response to Chinese land encroachment, officially renaming a Thai fruit. Because, of course, dragon fruit isn't Chinese. It's not even Asian. It's from Central America. The name dragon comes from Vietnamese culture, not Chinese mythology. Opposition politicians called it a distraction. Supporters said it promoted Indian identity. And here's the deeper irony. India itself was just starting to grow dragon fruit commercially. The country had only about 3,000 hectares under cultivation. The government had plans to expand to 50,000 hectares. Modi had personally praised farmers in Gujarat's Kutch Desert for growing the fruit on his radio program. So India was simultaneously trying to build a domestic dragon fruit industry and erasing the word dragon from its name. The renaming didn't catch on nationally, but it revealed something true about this fruit in the 21st century. Dragon fruit had become a blank screen. Every country projected its own story onto it. Vietnam called it national pride. China called it a domestic growth opportunity. India called it a symbol of self-reliance. Colombia called it premium export gold. One fruit. A dozen identities. Every one of them an invention. The original trick, the Vietnamese mythology that turned pitahaya into dragon fruit, was still paying dividends, even when governments tried to undo it. But while countries competed over what dragon fruit should represent, the plant itself was using a far older strategy to survive. One that had nothing to do with trade agreements or brand identity, and everything to do with the dark. Biology made dragon fruit possible. Vietnam made it profitable. But one bright pink drink made it famous. In 2018, Starbucks launched the Mango Dragon Fruit Refresher, a bright magenta beverage made with pieces of real red-fleshed dragon fruit. It cost around $4. It looked incredible in photos, and it went absolutely viral. Starbucks called dragon fruit one of those up-and-coming flavors. The drink joined the permanent menu across the US and Canada. Customers started requesting it with coconut milk instead of water. That became the dragon drink, the chain's most Instagrammed beverage of the summer. Western consumers had ignored dragon fruit for decades. Then one company found the color that made ignoring it impossible. Think about what that drink did. It wasn't really about flavor. Dragon fruit is mild, almost bland compared to mango or passion fruit. But the color, that electric magenta, in a clear plastic cup, against a white coconut milk background, that's not a drink. That's a photograph waiting to happen. This was dragon fruit's final trick. It convinced the Western world it was a luxury superfood, not through taste, but through appearance. It had everything wellness culture was looking for: fiber, antioxidants called betalains, the same compounds that make beets red, an exotic name, and an unforgettable color that screamed healthy even before you took a sip. Suddenly, dragon fruit wasn't niche. It was mainstream. Smoothie bowls, juice bars, frozen food aisles, natural food colorants replacing artificial dyes, cosmetics, dried snacks, even dragon fruit beer. The timing was perfect. Health-conscious millennials wanted foods that were nutritious and photogenic. Dragon fruit was both. Or at least, it looked like both. And here's where the plant's original strategy connects to its modern success. Remember, dragon fruit blooms at night. One night. That seems like a terrible plan for reproduction, but it's actually genius. During the day, thousands of flowers compete for pollinators. Bees, butterflies, birds, they're overwhelmed with options. But at night, almost nothing blooms. The competition vanishes. So the dragon fruit cactus opens its massive, fragrant flower after sunset. Moths and bats arrive, they have almost nothing else to visit. Pollination is nearly guaranteed. One night is all it needs. That's not a weakness, that's a strategy. Avoid the crowd, own the space nobody else wants. And isn't that exactly what dragon fruit did in the market? It didn't try to be the sweetest fruit or the most flavorful. It didn't compete with mangoes or strawberries on taste. Instead, it found the space nobody else occupied, the visual space, the Instagram space, the "I need this in my smoothie bowl because it looks amazing" space. The one-night flower and the billion-dollar brand used the same survival strategy. Find the gap, fill it, win. So here's what happened in just 60 years. A fruit that French missionaries planted as a garden curiosity in Vietnam became the basis of a billion-dollar export economy, triggered geopolitical renaming controversies, conquered social media through a Starbucks drink, and established itself in more than 30 countries. A Central American cactus pretending to be an Asian delicacy, marketed with an invented dragon myth, forced to bloom out of season by light bulbs, and sold to the West as a superfood based mostly on color. Would you have bet on that? The fruit conquered the world, but the country that made it famous now has to survive its own success. Vietnam, the nation that turned dragon fruit into a global commodity, faces pressure from every direction. China's domestic production has overtaken Vietnamese imports. Ecuador and Mexico compete on price in the Americas. India is scaling up fast. But Vietnam isn't giving up. It's pivoting. Frozen dragon fruit pulp for export, dragon fruit juice, dried snacks, natural food colorants extracted from the betalain pigments, even skincare products. The goal is to move up the value chain. Don't just sell raw fruit that spoils in 72 hours. Sell processed products. Sell ingredients. Sell the brand that Thang Long built. Vietnam's dragon fruit industry still employs hundreds of thousands of rural workers. For many families, especially in the Mekong Delta, the fruit is the difference between their children attending school and their children going to work. Losing this industry isn't an option. It's a threat to an entire way of life. Meanwhile, the science keeps evolving. Researchers are developing hybrid varieties that are sweeter, more disease-resistant, and longer-lasting after harvest. The plant that once needed almost no technology is now at the center of precision agriculture. Drones, AI-monitored irrigation, organic certification programs. Think about that arc for a moment. A cactus that climbs trees in Central American jungles. Offered in Aztec ceremonies 600 years ago, carried across oceans by conquistadors and missionaries, given a dragon's name by Vietnamese farmers, lit up at night by light bulbs visible from orbit, rebranded by a coffee chain, renamed by a government, and still spreading. It tricked geography. It tricked the seasons. It tricked consumers. It tricked markets. And it's still going. And it still blooms only once. In the dark. For a single night. That flower dies every morning, but the fruit it leaves behind just keeps spreading. That's how a flower that lives for one night created a fruit that fooled the entire world. It survived by finding gaps, in the dark, in the market, in the imagination. If you want to see how another ordinary food quietly rewrote global economics, watch the video on your screen now. You won't look at your grocery store the same way again. Subscribe for more stories like this every week. I'll see you in the next one.